Great. If you're visiting us this morning, a huge welcome. My name is Steve. I'm married to Jackie, and we have the privilege of leading the team here at CityHill. And we are in week 5 of our 6-week series that we've kicked off this year with called Better Together. 5 weeks ago, we handed out a booklet like this that everybody's been going through. We've been doing it in our life groups, watching the DVD midweek, and there's 40 days of devotions, and they're speaking around the idea of that we are better together. This morning, if you brought your book with you and you're ready to take notes, we are kicking off on page 72, 73. That's the start of this section about serving together. And previously in this series, we used a verse from Ecclesiastes which says, 2 are better than 1 because one can help another one up. And it says a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. In other words, God's designed us for community. I came across this short video clip of 2 tortoises, which made me think of the series that we're doing at the moment. Every one of us needs a friend to help us when we can't help ourselves. So wouldn't you play that short clip, and I'll come back after that. I don't know what language those children were speaking, but it's the international language of celebration. When the tortoise lands on its feet, we are better together. So this morning, we're speaking about around the purpose that God's given each one of us is that we were designed to serve. When God invites us into His family, He's graced every single one of us to be able to serve. Now, here's the deal, is you cannot serve God directly. It's not like you can take God a cup of tea or coffee. Because He has everything already, and He's invisible, He's all powerful, we can't serve Him directly from me to Him, but the way that I serve God is by serving other people. And so this morning, we're going to look at an Old Testament set of verses from the story of David and see what it teaches us about how to serve together as a team. This idea of teamwork is massive in the Bible. You won't find the word team. In fact, in the English language, it's quite a modern word. It's only been around for the last 500 years or so. But the idea of team and partnering together has been around from the very beginning. So we're going to look this morning at a story of David, and it comes from 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Just before we get there, I'd like to give you a little bit of a backstory for those that haven't recently read the story of David or you've never read that portion of the Bible. The first king of Israel was David's predecessor. His name was Saul. And he was a guy who was head and shoulders above the rest. He was picked by God, and he was a very impressive man. The thing that was unimpressive about him was that he didn't obey God. So there came a point where God said to him, Saul, I've rejected you as king. Now that didn't happen overnight. He was saying, for your future, you're not going to be king forever, and I've picked king somebody else. Separately to that, God sent Samuel, who was his prophet, the messenger, to this young shepherd boy named David and privately, secretly said to him, David, God's picked you as the next king. That must have been pretty big news for a young man to hear. But after that, it wasn't all plain sailing. At first, things went really well. David ended up, coincidentally, arriving in a battle where Goliath, the big giant, was taunting all the Israelites. And David, full of faith and courage, went out and killed that giant. He became a hero overnight in the nation of Israel. Saul wasn't that impressed with the nation's new hero, this young upstart named David. And David entered into Saul's service, but very soon Saul became very, very jealous of him and physically tried to kill him twice. David ran away. Saul hunted him down this is the whole national army hunting down David. And David started hiding away in caves and remote places in the desert. And this is where we pick up the story, is while David's hiding away, men start to trickle to where David is and become the start of his army. And it comes from 1 Chronicles chapter 12, and I'll pick up the verses as we go along. It says in verse 1, "These were the men who came to David at Ziklag while he was banished from the presence of Saul, son of Kish." That's the that's the existing king, David's predecessor. How many of you know this is not good news in that day and age, to have the king hunting you down and be banished? Ziklag was actually out of the country. And it says they were among the warriors who helped him in battle. They were armed with bows and were able to shoot arrows or to sling stones right-handed or left-handed. It's a remarkable verse, that, because my gran visited Israel when I was a young boy. She came back with a sling as a present for me. And I was rather underwhelmed. The little piece of kind of fabric that's woven and stitched together with 2 pieces of string. And she said, "Now what you do is," she says, "I saw this guy slinging the stone in Israel, and he made it look pretty easy. And when I tried it, I nearly broke a window behind me, because you put a stone in the sling, got to swing it around and let go one string with that stone flying out in hopefully the right direction." The warriors that arrived to help David, it says, were able to sling stones right-handed and left-handed. And in another passage says they were able to hit, they were very, very accurate. They didn't deviate much. These guys were crack shots. In verse 8, it says, "Some Gadites defected to David at his stronghold in the wilderness." They were brave warriors, ready for battle, and able to handle the shield and spear. Their faces were the faces of lions, and they were as swift as gazelles in the mountains. These Gadites, verse 14, were army commanders. The least of them was a match for 100, and the greatest for 1,000. Sometimes when I've read this verse, wondered what these Gadites looked like, that the writer said they had faces like lions and were swift as gazelles. These must have been fearsome, fearsome men ready to help David. Later on in verse 16, it says, "Other Benjamites and some men from Judah also came to David in a stronghold." Now, just to pause there, when it says Benjamites, that meant a whole lot to those readers, because Saul came from the tribe of Benjamin and David from Judah. So when it says some Benjamites came, that was saying some of Saul's tribe, guys that grew up in the same area where Saul grew up, came to David. And listen what David says to them. It says, "David went out to meet them and said to them, 'If you have come to me in peace to help me, I'm ready for you to join me. But if you have come to betray me to my enemies, when my hands are free of violence, may the God of our ancestors see it and judge you.'" Then the Spirit came on Amasai. This is one of the men who's arriving, chief of the 30, and he said, "We are yours, David. We are with you, son of Jesse. Success to you, and success to those who help you, for your God will help you." So David received them and made them leaders of his raiding bands. Some of the tribe, later on in verse 19, some of the tribe of Manasseh, it says, helped David against raiding bands, for all of them were brave warriors, and they were commanders in his army. Verse 22, "Day after day, men came to help David until he had a great army, like the army of God." This has been one of those passages that has always just spoken to me. Maybe it's because if you would ask me some of my favorite films, they'd all be in the fighting war kind of genre. Something wired inside of us blokes that thrills to the idea of the underdog being surrounded by guys that can fight and actually moving forward. And this is a story not just from a movie, this is a story from the Bible. David ends up becoming the greatest king in the history of Israel. His army was the most feared army over time, but it didn't just happen overnight. It was because of teamwork making the dream work. I'm borrowing a quote there from John Maxwell. It's something I say to our boys often, particularly when we need to go on holiday or come back from holiday and there's stuff to be unpacked and they're rushing off to go and do something. Guys, before we get busy with other stuff, it's teamwork that makes the dream work. They think it's pretty cheesy, and I think it got an amazing amount of truth in it, not just for unpacking cars, but for doing life together. So I'd like to speak this morning on how we can serve together as a team, drawing lessons out of the story of David. And I'm using the letters of team, T-E-A-M, as the first letters of my 4 points this morning. So how do we serve together? What can we learn about teamwork from David's army and from the stories? Number one is to work together in team. It requires trust. It requires trust. Sometimes I've used this analogy when I'm speaking with people where relationally trust is broken down completely. Is if you could imagine a suspension bridge with cables that goes from one point across a gorge to another point, and across that bridge are a whole lot of planks. The steel cables are the love that keep us together. But you know that you can love people and not have a huge amount of trust, because trust are like the planks in the cables. Now, some of us don't trust because we've been hurt previously, but sometimes trust is broken down in relationships. And so trust is like the planks that exist in the suspension bridge to enable us to communicate and to connect and to be on the same page together. Trust is essential to make teams work. And when I'm saying teams, I'm thinking of teams in so many different areas. I'm thinking firstly of life groups and how that forms a very important team in the life of our church. I'm not just thinking about life groups, I'm thinking about all of our teams that function, our eldership team, our deacon team, guys on the parking team, on our SWAT team. At every level, CityHill kids, we've got hundreds and hundreds of people involved in different teams serving in the life of the church. But I hope that what I have to say today goes beyond just church, because most of us are part of teams vocationally as well. We've got to work together. And without trust, teams don't function very well. Now, what's really interesting to me is how David dealt with people that he was uncertain where they stood. These were men, the Benjamites, who came to him, who could very easily have been deceiving him and actually came to hand him over to Saul, to their clan, to their tribesmen. And what he does, he's got a huge amount of reality in his heart. He's been hunted down. But he doesn't put all of that suspicion onto these guys up front. He knows and they know that they could be trouble. They understand what David's reservations would be. But this is what David says to them. It's amazing. He says, if you have come in peace to help me, I'm ready for you to join me. He says, if you say that you want in, I'll take you. You're welcome. But if you've come to betray me to my enemies, he says, I haven't done anything wrong. He says, then may God judge you. He says, God's looking out for me. And so if you've come with clean hands to join me, I welcome you. But if you've come to betray me, actually there's a God who's looking out for me. God who fights battles on my behalf. Does that make sense? So when we go into situations where we're not sure where people are from, not sure what things have happened, it's possible if we understand that God is, if you like, the great team leader, that I can be open-handed and open-hearted and say to people, well, if you're joining the team and your heart's with me, with us, we welcome you. But if not, I know that there's a God who's fighting my battles, and he'll look out for me, and he'll look out for you. Essentially is what David's saying. And there's a beautiful passage here straight afterwards where it says, Amasai, the chief of the 30. It says the Spirit of God actually comes upon him, and he says, David, he doesn't just say, David, we're with you. He says, we are with you, David. We are with you, son of Jesse. Success to you. He's not just talking about the man, he's talking about the plan. He says we can see that God is moving David's kingdom forward. And we want to be part of what God's doing. A couple of years back, I met Prince and Moy Mtetwa. I phoned them last night just to get their permission to share the story. Sit it down here in the front. Wouldn't you just say hello that I can see where you are down there, Prince and Moy? And you'll see why I'm telling the story in a moment. It relates to this verse. We ended up having a conversation. They'd moved here from another church. They had been very, very, very burnt in that church. Things had gone really poorly, and they'd been treated badly. as they started to share some of their heart, and they weren't trying to be critical of anybody else. You know, it's possible to share a story about other people that makes it seem like you were in the right and they were all such terrible people. They weren't trying to do that. They were just sharing their hearts. And the pain was evident of things that had gone wrong. And they were saying, we're not sure what God's next plan for us is, but we feel like it might be here together with you at CityHill, with us, with this team at CityHill. And while they were sharing, I thought to myself, I don't know them at all. That was our first meeting. God put this verse on my heart, reminded me of this verse. And I turned to it, 1 Chronicles 12, and I said to Prince and Moy, if God's joined your hearts together with us, we welcome you. And be free. There's no need to jump through a whole lot of hoops. You guys have served. You're warriors in God's kingdom. And the pain that you've had, don't let it stop you from fighting and moving forward. But if you've come with ulterior motives, well, then that's up to God. But our hearts are wide open to you. After I asked Prince and Moy if I could share that story, Moy sent me a whole lot of pictures and messages saying how from that day, between that day and now, God somehow used our little conversation to speak to them. And I have to tell you that Prince and Moy, for anybody who knows them, they are great warriors. And Moy was telling me about the ladies group that she runs once a month. They lead a life group which has started a whole lot of other life groups. They've been involved in a whole lot of different serving projects. Moy travels all over the place, involved in different ministries, etc., etc. God had joined their hearts together with us, and it didn't need years and years of journey. We are getting to know each other. We've come to know each other. But it didn't need all of that up front, because they were able to say, God has guided us here. We see that our paths and what this team is doing, they coincide. Now, it's easy to talk about trust. And it's easy to talk about how we've been hurt and how we've been pained by others. But I'd like to ask this question, trying to answer it briefly, is what does it take to become a trustworthy person? Because we look at the world through our lens saying, well, I want people to trust me. And how do I trust them? But you know, the Bible speaks about being a faithful person and being trustworthy. And I'd like to suggest that there's 3 ways that we can build trust and be more trustworthy. The first way is this: we need to be consistent. It's not just about what we say today or do today. It's about what we say and do next month, the month after, the month after, the month after. It's interesting in Luke 16 that Jesus gives this teaching. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. If you have worked in teams or been in groups with people that are very inconsistent, it's actually difficult to trust. Not because you don't want to, but because one week it's up, the next week it's down, the next week it's in, the next week it's out. And the Bible says, Jesus says, if you can be faithful with a little, whatever a little is, and we're consistently faithful, God can trust us with more. We become trustworthy in the teams that we work in. The second thing that I think builds trustworthiness in any group and any team is being reliable. There's a closely linked to being consistent, but being reliable. In Proverbs 25:19, it says this, like a broken tooth or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in a time of trouble. Don't you think that's a beautiful analogy? I mean, have you ever had a cavity or something wrong in your teeth, how painful it is to drink anything hot or cold? Or a sore foot and how difficult it is to walk fast. And the writer of Proverbs says that's exactly what it's like to have people who say they'll do something and don't do it. When there's trouble, they say, you can rely on me, and then they're not around, they're not there. I'd like to suggest that reliability means that if we say we're going to do something, that we actually do it. If we say we're going to phone somebody or say we're going to be there, that we are there. Now, I understand that all of us are wired in different ways. Some of us find it more easy that we've got times and places and dates and those kinds of things easier in our brains, but there's not a single one of us who's got an absolutely perfect memory. And if you and I say we're going to do something, and just relying on our memory to do it, it's very easy to let somebody else down, to be unreliable. So find a system is my suggestion. If you don't already have one, is of writing things down. Our modern technology has made it able to set reminders. Send yourself a message or an email if necessary. But if you say you're going to do something, let's find a way of doing it. When it comes to being in our life groups, because we speak about teaming together as community, if you say you're going to do something, let's do it. That builds trust. It helps move us forward. And the third way that I believe we become trustworthy is by being confidential. Proverbs, again, in verse 13 of chapter 11, says, a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. There's a whole lot to say around confidentiality, and I can't cover all of it. But I would like to say that when we're discussing with people in our groups or one-on-one with people's problems, this verse says that a gossip destroys confidence, destroys trust. Rick Warren puts it like this. He says, if you're not part of the problem or not part of the solution, then you shouldn't be talking about that situation. If you're not part of the problem or part of the solution, are you a confidential person? Or when a story comes to you and I, does it get broadcast to the entire circle of friends that you have one by one by one? This is a way of building trust. The ... that I don't have enough time to cover this morning is that being secretive when there's things that are dangerous and things that are harmful is also not good. But this is speaking broad level confidentiality when it comes to dealing with people's problems and situations. So that's the T. What does it take to serve together as a team? Number one, having trust and building trust. Secondly, from the story, is eagerness. Eagerness. That's the E in team. Listen to what it says, going back to the verse we read about the Gadites. It says, they were brave warriors, ready for battle, and able to handle the shield and spear. Their faces were the faces of lions, and they were as swift as gazelles in the mountains. Later on in the same chapter, it says about David's men, it says all of these were fighting men who volunteered to serve in the ranks. What I love about these verses is it speaks to bravery and it speaks to courage. It's not talking about eagerness up front, having never fought a battle. These were people who had been through some stuff. These were men who had fought some battles. They had seen some bloodshed. And it says they were ready for new battles. It's that kind of eagerness that I believe makes teams function. It's not signing up for something I know nothing about, although that's always the good starting point. But it's the eagerness when I've been through some things is still to pitch up ready for the next battle. I love this word in 1 Chronicles 12:38. It says, all of these were fighting men who volunteered to serve in the ranks. In army terms, what's the opposite of volunteered? It's to be conscripted. So conscription goes something like this. It says, you guys, you'll all come and fight in the army, and if you die, you die. That's a whole different mindset in the person fighting to the volunteers. Say, okay, how many of you guys are brave enough to come and fight in this battle on this day? And it says all of these men that were with David, they were volunteers. They said, pick me, pick me. Previously told the story of the three at a U.S. high school. There was somebody from the Army, there was somebody from, I think it was the Air Force, and somebody from the Marines. And they were inviting these young men to join up for their section for the next year. And they were given strict guidelines to speak for 5 minutes each. The man from the army went for about 7 minutes, extolling the virtues of the army, inviting these guys to sign up. And the next guy went for about 7 minutes as well, extolling the virtues of the Air Force, getting these guys to sign up. And with only 1 minute to go, the man from the Marines realized that he had just 60 seconds. And he got up and he looked at all of these young men for about 45 of the 60 seconds. And then he said, I don't think there's more than 1 or 2 people here who have got what it takes to join the Marines. I'd like to see those 1 or 2 straight after this session. Guess who had the most number of people roll up at his sign-up table? The Marine, because there's something inside of us actually that wants to be eager, wants to give our lives for a greater purpose. Another story of one of David's soldiers speaks about how he volunteered to go into a pit on a snowy day and kill a lion. He wasn't forced to. If I read that story, it looks like he got to. He was eager to. This thing of eagerness, this thing of bravery, this idea of courage, this idea of pitching up even after I've fought some more battles, volunteering to go into some more, for me is right at the heart of what makes strong teams function well, what makes great groups work even better, what makes great organizations move forward is people who say, I believe in what we're doing. I see, in a church context, I see what God is doing. I'm eager to be involved. I believe God laid on my heart just while I was preparing this that there's a whole lot of men and women here today that you've lost some of your eagerness and you're there, but it's not ready for battle. You've grown a little bit jaded, a little bit discouraged, a little bit on the back foot. And Romans 12:1 says this, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. When I read that verse, it seems to me that spiritual fervor and spiritual zeal is something that we choose to fight for. We contend for our own eagerness. In the Psalms, the writer often speaks to his own soul. He says, why are you downcast, O my soul? It's like he's looking in the mirror. He's saying, why didn't you pitch up today, soul? Why so uneager? Look to God. Draw your strength and courage from Him. And I don't believe that eagerness is gained just by kind of a big pep talk in the tunnel, banging our heads against the wall. But I believe first and foremost it's gained from spending time with God. Previously, I've spoken about the importance of our daily time connecting with God, reading His Word, spending some time in prayer, reflecting, allowing His infinite strength to flow into my very finite life. That when I arrive to do what needs to be done, when I arrive, in my case, as a husband and as a father and at work, is that I arrive having found the strength and courage, the eagerness from God to move things forward that need to be moved forward. It takes trust, it takes eagerness to work together in groups and in teams. And thirdly, the A in the word team is abilities. The one that I've picked for today. It says this about the men that came to David in verse 2. It says they were armed with bows and were able to shoot arrows and sling stones right-handed or left-handed. That word able to, or that phrase able to, is a very strong one. Because it wasn't just that they were eager to, it was also that they were able to. And for me, teamwork and working together in groups or in any team within this church or anywhere else involves seeing what are the abilities that people have, what has God enabled people to do, and using the right abilities in the right places to fulfill the right tasks. And God has gifted us with a huge variety of different abilities, all of us. Now, just a little tissenhakkies here, a little comment. None of us arrive ready formed. These men didn't arrive, they weren't born able to sling stones right-handed or left-handed. There was work, there was development on those abilities, but they must have had some kind of inclination towards stone slinging or spear throwing or whatever it was. And so our God-given abilities, part of the onus on every single one of us is to find what is our God-given shape and how do we bring that into service within our groups, within any teams, within the world that God's placed us in. Using the examples of Life Group, if you are leading a group, you might never know who has abilities to help lead the discussion if you don't give people some opportunity and give people the moment here and there. Say, next week we're discussing this. I'm going to send you through the questions. Wouldn't you have a shot? You got 15 minutes and give some guidance. I've heard some leaders who do that as a regular pattern, blown away at the abilities that people sitting in their lounges or in their groups around coffee tables have with leading discussions, facilitation. Many people here have a gift of hosting. Have you made those gifts available? Is your home, if you have one, wide open, saying, I'd be willing to have a group. I'm eager to have people come through my house. What about the ability to provide some snacks or eats? I hope that doesn't fall just on a group leader or on the usual home or host of any of our groups. We've got people in this church who, in the last little while, Graham Kigan has been speaking about some counseling training that he's taken a group of people to sign up for. And a whole lot of people that I believe have a gift of empathy and an eagerness to help other people have signed up for that, and the bar is pretty high. In terms of what these guys have been doing, I'm sure he'll give more details in due course when the next round of it runs. But it's been a commitment to serve to attend this course for a certain number of weeks. And if I'm not mistaken, if you can't make one or at the most two, you might as well not attend at all. There's a fee that needs to be paid. There's a test exam thingy that needs to be done at the end. And a whole lot of people have said, what, I'm willing to sign up for that. I feel that's a God-given ability that I'd like to develop. I was speaking with somebody who's very involved in the life of the church this week, saying to me how in business, he feels like a God-given ability that something God's been stirring is with regards to business and to finances, to set things up in such a way that it generates finances for kingdom projects. That people who've got the passion for the hands and feet are able to do what they need to be doing because of how he lives out his life and carries out their business. Every one of us have been gifted by God in different ways. Every one of us got different abilities. And any team, any group is weaker if we don't bring our abilities, our strengths, and our gifts to the fore and say, I'm ready to be used. Now, this goes with all the other things, because if it's just me bringing my abilities kind of on parade and saying, use me, and then I feel I get slighted because somebody didn't use me the way I wanted to be used, well, that's not teamwork either, because it involves keeping my heart pure and heart sharp. Sharp's the wrong word, heart soft, gentle. But every one of us has got God-given abilities and God-given nudges that we should follow. Last week, Sunday morning, at the end of the service, as I will do this morning, I did last week, and I invited anybody who doesn't have a connection with God at this point just to raise their hands wherever they were seated, that we'd love to pray for them. And a number of people raised their hands last week and were prayed for. And normally on a Sunday, I don't get to meet most of the people who raised their hands. But last Sunday, I got to meet, there was a young lady who raised her hand, and that couple came forward at the end. And Faye Coleman brought them. Faye usually sits out this way somewhere. I'm not sure if you're here this morning, Faye, but one of Faye's gifts is the ability to see a need and meet a need. The ability to just see a need and meet a need. She told me the story, Faye told me the story, how 2 months ago she had come across the story about this couple who'd been in tremendous need, had suffered tremendous tragedy, and they'd lost their little son, who was 18 months old. And Faye and her daughter Megan, who run a business together, had jumped in and come to help this family. And there'd been an overwhelming amount of support from the church. She had invited them along to the church, and they attended the service for the first time last week, Sunday morning. And this was the young lady who raised her hand, who had been reached out to in a moment of great crisis. That wasn't the end of the story, because on the Tuesday night, they came along to the new members' intro tea. So they'd attended for about 48 hours at CityHill, and they were plugged in. And I spoke to this young man who'd suffered this loss, and what he said blew me away. He said, we have been blessed so much through our loss and through this tragedy. He says, I want to know, how can I get involved to help serve and give on to other people? Can you see the amazing beauty of using our gifts and using the nudges that God gives us? Faye didn't have to react to that story at all, but she saw need and met a need. And through that, God was able to bring a young couple, and they might be here this morning, and it would be great if you guys were back. Come along. God does something very deep in that young lady's heart, and the next step is them saying, we are keen on serving, we're keen on being involved, where can we get connected, and how can we bless others the way that God has looked out for us. So what are you and I able to do? What are the God-given passions and talents? What are the things that make you come alive? What are the stirrings and the wirings that God's placed inside of you? One of the ways that we can see where our abilities lie, or where God might be directing us, is to see what gives us divine discontentment. What are the things that when you think about them and when you see them and when you hear about them, it stirs something inside of you? And you know that that's different for every single person. I remember when we bought these chairs, and I announced it on the first Sunday saying we were looking to raise the funds to buy these chairs because each chair tells a story. And if you've joined this church since these great chairs were bought, somebody else put their faith out so that your story could be told together with our story. The very first person who spoke to me, and I don't expect I'm just telling you the stories I know. I certainly don't expect every person to speak to me. But it happened to be that I was at breakfast and somebody said, when you spoke about chairs, that stirred my heart, and I don't know why and I don't know how, but I just love the idea of chairs. And I want to buy the first 100 chairs. I want to donate towards the first 100 out of the 1,000. That just got him on that particular day. But there's different things, different avenues, different places, different things that God's doing in the world and in our city and in our lives. And when those things trigger, very often it's God saying, I want you to get behind that. I want to use the particular abilities, the talents to get in that stream, joining that fight, if you like, that army, moving things forward. My fourth point this morning, the M in team, is mission. I'd like to suggest that this is what distinguishes us in our church groups and church teams and as the local church of God from any other group or any other kind of organization in the entire world, any kind of society or club or any welfare organization, is the kind of mission that we're on. Is that we're not just trying to build trust, we're not just trying to be more eager, we're not just trying to use our God-given abilities, but we realize that we're on a divine mission. And this is what these men that joined David saw. They figured out that God was moving what was happening there forward. They say, we want to join you. We want to strengthen that. What is the mission that the local church should be on? We could say it in many different sentences or many different ways, and it's a multifaceted mission, but I think we could boil it down to this one sentence that Christ said. Well, let me rephrase it. I'm boiling it down to this one sentence for today. Luke 19 and verse 10. It says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. The background to that story was the story of Zacchaeus. Many of you will be familiar with that story, and some of you may have never heard it, but Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem and passing through a town or city called Jericho, and he was quite famous at that point. Everybody had kind of come out to see him, and there was this man. The Bible tells us that he was short, that he was wealthy. He had made his wealth through devious means because he was collecting taxes on behalf of the Roman overlords. And it said he was just interested, so he went out to see Jesus as he passed by. And because of the crowds, he couldn't see over their heads, so he climbed up into a small tree there. And an amazing thing happened out of that entire city. Jesus stopped at the foot of that tree, and he looked up, and he said, Zacchaeus, today I'm coming to your house. He knew his name. And nowhere in Luke 19 are we told what Jesus and Zacchaeus spoke about. But at the end, Zacchaeus comes out and he says, I'm willing to pay back to everybody that I've cheated and robbed. Might be a message in there just for someone here this morning. If you've cheated or robbed anybody else, business dealings, somewhere you know that you didn't do right by somebody else. Part of Zacchaeus' restoration was also restitution. said, I'm willing to give back to those that I've stolen from. And Jesus said, today salvation has come to Zacchaeus' house. He's a changed man today. This is a changed household. And then he said to everybody that was gathered around, he said, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. He says, I am on a mission on this planet to look out for people who don't even know that they need looking out for. Zacchaeus hadn't arrived that morning thinking, boy, I'm in such a bad way. I need to have a conversation with Jesus. He was just had a passing interest. And Jesus paused and said, Zacchaeus, today I'm coming to change your house, and I'm coming to change your life. And I'm coming to turn you not upside down, but I'm coming to turn you the right way around, because that's the mission that I'm on. That's a whole lot of paraphrase in there, the Steve Wimble paraphrase of the Zacchaeus story. Now, the Bible says in Ephesians that when we come to faith in Christ, that Christ lives in our hearts by faith. So Christ he's seated at the right hand of God, the Bible tells us, but he's also omnipresent. He's everywhere. And then as if that wasn't tricky enough for my brain to cope with, it also says he lives inside of me. So he's everywhere and inside. Now, if Christ's mission on this earth was to look out for people who didn't yet know that they were lost, and that's what drove him in his actions and in his movements, what do you think the Christ in me today should be doing? Surely driving me to do the same thing. That I'm on this lifelong mission from today till the day that I die, and all the space in between, is to follow the mission of Christ wherever his urgings and his nudgings guide me. A few weeks back, about 8 weeks ago, and I asked Jono for permission to tell the story. And I don't know if you told Alex and Joe, but I see that coincidentally they're right here in the second row. So with your permission, Alex and Joe, who I met on Tuesday for the very first time. About 8 weeks ago, a young guy who happens to be seated here, Alex, attends church. And at the end, he raises his hand in that time of prayer, says, yes, that's me. It's like that Zacchaeus kind of response, but our version of it on that particular Sunday morning. And Jono just happened to see Alex's hand go up. Previously, Jono told me yesterday, he said he's been on a journey that he's been trying to say to God, wherever you nudge me, whatever the nudges are, I want to follow those nudges. I want to go, I want to just take a risk. And at the end of that service, he went and spoke to Alex, prayed with him, invited him into our meet and greet cafe, and invited Alex and Joe along to their life group, which they did. A couple of weeks later, if I have the story correct, it was the week before the baptism service. Joe made some kind of response saying, I need to get more connected with God. They went to the baptism teaching, and Jono had the great privilege at a baptism service of baptizing Alex and Joe together. Tuesday night, they took another step forward by coming along and saying we want to be more connected in the life of the church through our intro tea. And you can see the connection, Jono and Mia and Alex and Joe seated there in the second row. Not that that's a more holy row than any other row, but I'm not sure. We never know what all the options would work out like, but I'm not sure what Alex and Joe's journey would have been like if Jono hadn't just followed a nudge and said, I'm willing to take a chance, go and introduce myself to a stranger, have a conversation, and invite them along to our life group. You see, that's much more than just trust and eagerness and ability. That's being on mission. That's saying, God, let me just paint this for a picture. Jono and Mia could say, you know what, we've got so much going down at the moment. Things have been tough, and they have been tough for them business-wise. Things have been tough. We've got so much happening in our worlds currently, we don't need to go and say hello to yet another person. But something on the inside of mission grabs hold of their hearts and says, I'm willing to just have another conversation, take a step. And as we do this under God's guidance, see, God doesn't want any of us to burn out. What I'm trying to say this morning is not that we sign up to do everything all the time, everywhere. But then the groups that we're in, we follow his nudgings. We bring our eagerness, we bring our abilities. When we gather together like this, we're a community of people. We better together. And one week, I'm the tortoise on its shell, with my legs in the air, metaphorically speaking, and somebody else comes and gives just a handshake, a thank you, a word of encouragement. And another week, you're the tortoise on your back, and your life group gathers around in praise or supports or is God's hands and feet or in some way. And this, for me, is what it means to be an army, but in the most loving sense of that word, the community of God, the local church. When I think of what God has for us and all that He's called us and invited us to do, places that He has for us to reach, the families that He has for us to connect with and influence. I'm speaking in our groups, in our communities. Only heaven will fully know the extent that your teaming and my teaming together with others in our groups here on Sundays and all the different avenues and aspects where God's placed us. Only heaven knows what the full extent of our impact and influence will be in time.